Good morning. The June 30th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates will continue to meet virtually. At this time, I'm going to ask our Comptroller Bill Henry, for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have the following changes and corrections. On page 61, item Circuit Court for Baltimore City, ratification of memorandum of understanding with the Administrative Office of the Courts. Under action requested of the Board of Estimates, please replace the existing language with the following, quote, "The Board is requested to ratify the memorandum of understanding, MOU, E19-0004-25K with the Administrative Office of the Courts, AOC, and approve option 1 that extends the period of performance to April 1st, 2021, and approve and authorize execution of modification number 1, which further extends the period of performance to April 1, 2022, close quote." Under background/explanation, after the first paragraph, add the following. On October 23rd, 2019, the Board approved the MOU with an effective date of June 24th, 2019, and an ending date of April 1, 2020, with an option to extend for 1 year. The AOC notified the Department of General Services on March 3rd, 2020, of its intent to exercise the option extending the MOU from April 2nd, 2020 to April 1st, 2021, but Board approval was not requested. The approval was not requested because of the restrictions and closures during the COVID-19 pandemic. The need to immediately address the safety of staff while continuing to serve the citizens of Baltimore and other pressing priorities that materialized as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in the delay in the timely processing of approval of option 1 and modification number 1, close quote. There are no protests for today's meeting. The following items are being deferred. On page 20, Baltimore Development Corporation First Amendment to Land Disposition Agreement is being deferred until July 14th, 2021. On page 52, item number 5, Bureau of Procurement Contract number 08000, 800 megahertz radio facilities maintenance agreement with Motorola Solutions Incorporated is being deferred until July 14th, 2021. The following items are moved to the non-routine agenda. On page 48, Department of Audits, Audit Report, the City of Baltimore, Maryland Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and Single Audit Together, with reports of independent public accountants for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020. And on page 62, the Department of Law, Settlement Agreement and Release. No items are being moved to the routine agenda. The following abstention was received by the Board from the Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott on pages 25 and 26, items number 1, 2, 3, and 4, Health Department agreements with the Johns Hopkins University. There are no other abstentions, and that's it for changes to the agenda, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now direct the Board's attention to a memorandum from our office dated June 28th, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items. Together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by the Comptroller, I will entertain a motion to approve all items contained in the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The routine agenda has now been adopted. On to the non-routine agenda items that have been noted by Comptroller Henry. The first item of today can be found on page 48, Department of Audits, Audit Report. This item is the city's comprehensive annual financial report and single audit together with reports and independent public accountants for the fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2020. At this time, I would like to recognize the city auditor, Mr. Joshua Pass, to introduce this item along with the members of his team who will present. Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I am going to share my PowerPoint presentation. Everyone see that? Okay, good morning, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, Mr. Comptroller, and honorable members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Josh Pash, and I am here to present the comprehensive annual financial audit report and the single audit for the fiscal years ended June 30th, 2020. I would like to thank the audit team, including the Department of Audits and SBN Company, and all of the agencies and their members who helped us to get through this audit and to make it a success.
Man, she feel like we should split it.
What I will be covering is clarifying and giving a simple definition of CAFR and single audit, explaining the difference between an unqualified and qualified opinion, presenting the audit opinion on the CAFR, going through and defining what the categories of control weaknesses are, and going through the CAFR findings, giving the opinion on the single audit and the basis for that opinion, and then going through a summary of the findings and question costs, and then highlighting the findings that were repetitive over the past 3 years. The CAFR, or the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, is the city's financial statements, which includes the entire city, and an audit opinion to give an opinion on the reasonable assurance of the material accuracy of those statements. The single audit is an audit that is required by the federal government that requires expenditures of federal money over $750,000 to be audited and to be audited and to have a risk-based assessment of other programs to be audited. Generally, all the programs are audited over a 3-year cycle, even if they are not considered significant. The city gets approximately $215 million in federal expenditures, and approximately $66.9 million of that money was passed through to subrecipients. We will also, as part of this package, have a report on the internal controls that will identify the weaknesses and control deficiencies. Unqualified opinion. An unqualified opinion indicates that the financial statements represent a fair and materially correct financial position of the statement of activities and the statement of position. A qualified opinion is when the financial statements are fairly presented except for a specific issue, and the issue is typically either a limitation of scope, in other words, we cannot get evidence to validate that, or a lack of conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, maybe some inadequate disclosures, uncertainty in estimates, or missing statements. The audit opinion on the CAFR is an unqualified opinion, which means that we found the statements to present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of those government activities and according to GAAP. Categories of control weaknesses. So the control weaknesses will be identified and classified into these 3 categories. A deficiency is when the design or the operation of a control does not allow management or employees in the normal course of performing their assigned functions to prevent, detect, or correct misstatements. In other words, the built-in system of checks and balances may not catch an error when this is identified. A significant deficiency, which is less significant than a material weakness, but is of higher importance and is important enough to merit attention by those in charge of governance, that can be a deficiency that has a bigger impact or a combination of deficiencies. A material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that it is reasonably possible that a material misstatement is one that will affect the decisions made by the users of the statements, of the entity's financial statements, and it is reasonably possible that will not be prevented, detected, and corrected on a timely basis. Those are the ones that demand the most urgent attention. We have broken out the findings into ones that specifically relate to the CAFR, which is the citywide financial statements. And for the CAFR, the material weaknesses are the grant of accounting function. what brought this up to immaterial weaknesses was that the allocation of grant revenues and expenditures were found to be booked on into incorrect general ledger accounts, and that the controls to make sure that they were booked into the correct general ledger accounts, there was a reasonable possibility that they would not ensure that. And then we also noted lack of formal procedures and accountability at various departments, and then lack of communication between the agencies that receive grants and the Department of Finance. The key here would be that the Department of Finance will handle certain roles, such as receiving the cash, and the agencies will handle other roles, such as billing for those reimbursements. And the lack of communication there is a significant cause of our incorrect reporting. Financial reporting, we had a number of post-year adjustments, which related to undiscovered errors throughout the fiscal year. So what this means is these were caught in the audit and not through the normal course of operations or the city's internal procedures. Payroll and timekeeping function. This is one that's been mentioned in a number of biannual audits. The main points here are that there is not a sufficient system for proper approval and storage of timekeeping information among the different departments. And then the challenge specifically related to grants is that much of the reimbursement for grants is employee time and payroll. And the timekeeping system, and remember this is under ADP for fiscal year 20, does not have the capability to maintain timekeeping records to submit the time charges to specific programs. The city does not have policies and procedures to maintain records consistently throughout the period and across departments, and does not have standardized forms. And then we also noted that there are agencies that have had in fiscal year 20 their own timekeeping system. Water and waste billing function, this relates to the CAFR. Number of significant accounts have not been billed. A number of accounts had been billed inconsistently. We also, in order to put together the financial statements, had to work with the department to estimate revenue, which could not be determined with a reasonable amount of certainty. And the cause for these errors that we identified was the new billing system, the transfer of data to that, and that was implemented years ago and still has not been resolved, which brings us to the material weakness. Fixed asset accounting. So we had $1.1 billion of fixed assets, which had to be manually identified and calculated, which means that the internal systems were not capturing those. And then also to calculate depreciation, the audit found significant errors in that calculation. We have a material weakness in information security. Part of it goes back to the malware back in 2019. And then also the reason it is on this report is because efforts to recover the data and improve IT security by the completion of fiscal year 20, which is June 30th, 2020, was not complete. We also have a material weakness in cash accounting function. When looking at our bank account, we noted approximately $49 million of cash that could not be identified to where it came from and what it was used for, and then properly classified to the different funds, accounts, and agencies. Okay, opinions on the single audit. We have an unmodified opinion on the major federal programs. Those are the ones that were significant according to the federal rules and regulations, and that except for the following programs, which had a qualified opinion. That is housing opportunities with people with AIDS, Coronavirus Relief Fund, Aging Cluster, Children's Health Insurance Program, Medical Assistance Program, HIV Emergency Relief Project Grants, HIV Prevention Activities, and Maternal and Child Health Services Block Grants to the states. And the next couple of slides will identify what the specific findings and weaknesses were that led to these being a qualified opinion. So the qualified opinion, and just to kind of generally go over it, Activities allowed and unallowable, looking into the rightmost column, is basically the testing whether the activities that are charged to a program fit within the definition of that program. Compliance over internal control over eligibility, that relates to, do we have controls to confirm and verify and ensure that the people, the recipients of those services for that grant are eligible? Sub-recipient monitoring indicates when we pass money down through another organization to run the program, that the city has certain responsibilities to monitor and oversee that program, and those were not sufficient. All these are material weaknesses. And so also we had certain programs have special tests and provisions. So for this one, there was a special provision of housing quality standards, which we did not have sufficient controls over. Activities allowed or unallowed and allowable cost principles under payroll. That is what I mentioned above, also under the CAFR, which is identifying and having controls to indicate that payroll costs are charged to the correct program and in the right amount. Sub-recipient monitoring is repeated. That's just falling under the Department of Treasury. Procurement are certain procurement controls, and the federal regulations require us to follow their procurement rules and ours. So Department of Health had these specific ones, which I will also get back to in a later slide. Period of performance indicates that the expense was recorded in the correct period, which can mean either that it falls within the scope of the grant. So if the grant was a 2-year grant, did the expense fall into that 2 years? And then also if it was recorded in the correct period for the city. So if the expense was a fiscal year 20 expense, was it recorded in fiscal year 20? Or if it was not recorded until fiscal year 21, those exceptions and controls are identified here. Reporting, we summarize what that is above. Cash management summarized was above. And these are the federal programs and the funding department on the federal side that had material weaknesses, which led to those qualified opinions. Going into the summary of the question, cost, and the findings. So the material weakness, the first one, and these are overall in general. So the schedule of expenditure of federal awards, which is basically the financial statements of the single audit, listing all of the grant programs, where they came, who the sources, how much was spent. We have a material weakness over the accuracy of that. Compliance over internal control over procurement, suspension, and debarment. What that means is, do we have controls in place to verify that we are not giving money to someone who has been suspended or debarred in the by the federal program? And then activities allowed or unallowable by cost principles, payroll, and others. So for the payroll, we identified that if that's the person's time is charged to the right program. And then others would be other expenditures, whether we're buying inventory or supplies or paying a vendor, that those are also fall within the scope of the grant which they're charged. Loans and loans guarantees, there are certain grant programs which the city gives out loans, and there are requirements that have controls over those. There was a material weakness over those. Eligibility and sub-recipient monitoring we spoke about, special tests we spoke about, and the last two we spoke about. These were all identified as material weaknesses in general categories. And then we also had significant deficiencies in compliance over eligibility, which meant that for certain programs, there was a material weakness in this area, and certain programs, there was a significant deficiency. Controlled deficiency over period of performance, which was also in other programs. These next slides identify the major programs that had findings, and the numbers that are in the columns indicate the fiscal year which had the finding. The first column is the funding department on the federal side. The second column is how much we expended during fiscal year 20. So that's how much it made an impact. The third column, agency, is the agency at the city that was receiving the funds and had oversight. And then the next columns are the requirements by the federal government over that. So activities allowed, allowable cost principles, eligibility, procurement suspense, and sub-recipient monitoring, and special tests. So as we can see here, under Department of Housing and Urban Development, Home Investment Partnerships, the third from the bottom, for eligibility, we had findings of material weakness in eligibility for fiscal years 20, 19, and 18, and the same as special tests and provisions. I will just highlight here for the US and EPA for capitalization grants of clean water state resolving funds. Under procurement suspension and debarment, we had repeat findings 20, 19, and 18, and then also under that capitalization grants for drinking water state resolving funds program. This is the programs that fall under the Baltimore City Health Department, and highlighting the CHIP program had material weaknesses in activities allowed and unallowed and allowable cost for all 3 years. And that was the same for the medical assistance program. And then for HIV prevention, we had repeat findings over 2 years in most of the categories. Okay, I would like to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. At this point, are there any questions or concerns for the auditor from members of the board? Ms. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have some remarks, but first I wanted to ask if the city auditor could go back and talk a little bit more about the 49 million in unallocated cash receipts.
Yes. Okay. So over the past couple of years, the unidentified cash receipts falls within the range of 12 to 22 million. Fiscal year 20 was significantly higher at around 49 million. And basically what the finding is that when an agency does the billing, and a lot of this falls into grants. So an agency will bill the grantor, whether it be state, federal, or another grantor or private grantor. Those bills and invoices are not consistently sent to the Department of Finance. What happens is the Department of Finance and the Bureau of Revenue Collection, when they identify the cash receipts that are coming to the bank and match it up to the revenue, if the agency has identified what we're expecting and it's a match 1-for-1, then they match it up, they book it, they close out the accounts receivable, and everything's fine. A large number, there is the lack of communication between the Department of Finance and the agencies. So the Department of Finance does not know what to book that to, and it basically gets put into a suspense account. Research is done by the Department of Finance. However, as noted, the impact has increased significantly over in fiscal year 20.
Mr. Auditor, the assumption is with the size of the federal grants as well as the amount of urgency related to COVID-19 probably exacerbated some of the existing issues that were in play to make that amount significantly increase to 49 million. Is that part of your findings?
This, I think, comes down to a root cause, which has led to a number of findings through a number of audits that we performed, which is the communication. So the communication is, number one, the city still has a historical siloed approach in many agencies, although I have seen that improving. The other one is the system to track revenue. Certain agencies have their own systems. So Department of Rec and Parks has a cash receipt system, which they use for pools and parks, which is not integrated with the city system. And that is not just there, that's across the board. And then when billing for federal grants, that is typically done through either a federal system or through a system that's outside of city dynamics and the city system. And so therefore, finance can't go into the system and city dynamics and say, okay, this is what we're expecting from this person. And that communication on both the system and process level, as well as, departments just having that open communication is, I would say, the root cause. I wouldn't want to say, but I wouldn't say it's unlikely that the increase in teleworking might have exacerbated it, but the city can and should address this in a way where teleworking would not impact it.
Mr. Auditor, can you talk about the material weaknesses? What are the next steps to ensure that the city and agencies are correcting the items that you point out? One major concern is when we talk about recs and parks, we've literally been talking about the money for pools and money for other services for a decade. I think this was something that was pointed out, over 10 years ago when me and Comptroller Henry sat on the council. Like, what are the next steps for the administration and agencies to correct that? And somehow, is that a action item that's reported back to you? How do the citizens and us on the board know that we're moving in the right direction to correct some of these issues? Mr. Auditor, you're on mute. Yeah. Mr. Auditor, can you hear us? If so, we cannot hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. So number one, each one of these findings has a response by the city, whether it is a centralized response, typically from the Department of Finance, or it is a response specifically from an agency. And all of those are in the report. Number two, the city has been migrating from agencies putting in place their own IT systems to having that centralized under BSIT. And when cities put in their own IT systems, such as the cash receipts and other systems they have without going through IT, there's typically no plan to integrate that in. And also, we end up with kind of multiple systems, which probably in most cases could be unified with one system addressing multiple needs. The city has taken a significant effort to bring in a unified system, Workday, to address these. One of the things that I would suggest and strongly recommend to the administration, to the Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, is that at the very highest level of leadership, you're taking an active role or an active interest on these programs and making sure that, number one, like, hiccups are being addressed, and then also number two, asking the question, how is this going to address the findings that we've had in the single audit and the CAFR over the past 3+ years? The Department of Audits is making an effort by attending different planning meetings for Workday and asking those specific questions. And so Workday does have the capability to address most, if not all. However, in order to do that, one of the challenges is we can't take the old processes and systems and just put them into a new database. We have to modify the processes and also modify the culture. So the real key to any audit is follow-up and making sure that those are being addressed. And so each time we reach out to an agency and we're doing the single audit and the CAFR, we're going back over these same ones. And that's why repeat findings are specifically highlighted to you because those are the ones of which are continuing, especially the material weaknesses, and are not being addressed from year to year. So my recommendation to the board is to be active, to be getting updates and assessments, not only on the status of the program, but how is it addressing, how is it making the city accountability better?
No, I appreciate that. I think from my position, from a legislative perspective, maybe we should turn the findings and actions that come after it into a legislative oversight hearing to ensure that we're moving in the right direction to chip away at, knock out, particularly some of these historic findings that we've seen in audit reports over and over and over again. So I'm committed to kind of doing that. A couple quick questions. Is there a responsibility for us to self-report some of these issues, particularly as it relates to the federal grants?
No. It is no. Basically, the self-reporting will be in the follow-up audit. There have been instances in the past where either grantors or third parties came and asked questions, and that indicated a follow-up. I have been asked to go back in certain situations and take a look at it, but to have a agency or a process owner specifically come back and say we've completed this one, we do not. That's not part of our process or the federal process.
Understood. Okay. I'm just obviously concerned that it might jeopardize us receiving additional funds in the future. The fact that you've taken time and your team's taken time to kind of really dig in the details and identify some troubling issues is concerning, but that's what I was wondering if it behooved us to self-report or I didn't understand that process. So thank you. At this point, Comptroller Henry, do you have additional questions or concerns?
Well, two things, Mr. President. First of all, is there somebody who's not muted who's causing the feedback?
It's the auditor, Comptroller.
Oh, Josh, you need to mute yourself when you're not talking. There we go. Hey. No? Well, okay. Let's hope for the best. The first thing, Mr. President, I just wanted to let you know that our office has already reached out to Councilman Costello and I believe your staff to talk about doing a full council hearing on this because there's a lot of detail that needs to be gone through that we can't go through just in the middle of a Board of Estimates meeting, but we're enthusiastic about the prospect of you turning it into a legislative oversight so that we can really get into the meat of some of these findings. Second, I share your concerns with the number of repeat findings. Some of these agencies have repeat findings going back 3 years in a row. And if we're going to do better, if we're going to not have this same issue for a fourth year, next year, we've got to make some fundamental changes. First of all, several city agencies are going to need to improve their grant management processes. Workday will be helpful, but Workday is a system. We also need more resources in terms of personnel training and sharing knowledge with new employees. There are a number of situations where there are just one or two key people in an agency who have really a large amount of expertise and institutional knowledge, and we need to do a better job of distributing that information so we have some real redundancy in the system. I'm going to urge the Budget Bureau to make sure that they provide agencies, especially the Health Department, with these sufficient resources so that grant management can be more effective and efficient, and that way departments can be even more successful in the Health Department's case with ensuring the health and safety of our residents. But there really also needs to be a comprehensive effort across city agencies to document and standardize the grant management processes and procedures. This is something that is a best practice and needs to be done. And we've already had very preliminary conversations with City Administrator Shorter And we know that with the collaboration of the mayor and the agency heads, we can make this happen. But Mr. President, the other thing I wanted to remind everyone is that the findings in today's CAFR related to water billing are separate from the performance audit that the department is still conducting. When that's completed, I do look forward to an in-depth discussion and working collaboratively to develop solutions to address the water billing issues that have vexed city residents and businesses for years. Audits work best when they demonstrate how agencies can operate more effectively and efficiently while remaining transparent and preserving accountability for how they use public funds. Mr. President, I look forward to working with you, the mayor, to use this audit and future audits to affect meaningful change in the way city government serves the people.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Mr. Mayor, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. No, Mr. Auditor, thank you for your audits, and for you, Mr. President and Mr. Comptroller. We've talked about this before, but these are the exact tasks that the city administrator has to make sure that we have a centralized system. We know that Director Raymond, under his leadership, is making sure that our finances under a centralized, modernized system that exists in 2021 technology, not 1995 technology. We know that our grant system has to be and will be centralized so that it's not different from agency to agency. This is the work that is underway. We will make sure to brief both of you along the way, and Mr. President, if with the full council when you guys have hearings, because this is important, non-sexy, tough work that has to happen. The city has been behind the times for far too long. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of collaboration. It's going to take a lot of bumping heads to get this done the right way, but we will get it done the right way because it's the only way the city's going to move forward. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from any other members of the board? Mr. Auditor, if you could take down the presentation. Only because it's challenging for me to see if folks are raising their hands or not. I think we're good. Mr. Solicitor, you're fine. Director DPW is good. We've heard from the mayor as well as comptroller. So seeing no further questions, we have receipt of this report. It'll be noted. I thank you, Mr. Arter, for all your hard work. Again, as the mayor as well as comptroller expressed, we look forward to some follow-up discussion. The point of an audit is for us to correct, not for us to audit again and for you to keep finding the same thing. So we look forward to working directly with you to ensure that the administration and the agencies have all that they need to continue to move the ball in the right direction. So thank you for all your hard work, Mr. Auditor. The final item on the non-routine agenda today can be found on page 62, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. The settlement relates to an action brought by 4 different plaintiffs related to a 6-day lockdown on sections of Harlem Park during the investigation of the death of Detective Sean Suter. The plaintiffs, who are residents of Harlem Park, allege that Baltimore Police Department presence impeded their free access to their homes, and they were stopped by BPD officers without cause. At this time, I would like to recognize either City Solicitor Shea or members from the Law Department, as well as BPD, to come speak on this item. Solicitor Shea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Deputy Solicitor will report on this item.
Got you. Deputy Solicitor Ingram, the floor is yours. I yield it to you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Honorable Mayor Scott, President Mosby, and Comptroller Henry. I'm Darnell Ingram, Deputy City Solicitor, and the Law Department is requesting the Board of Estimates to approve and authorize the execution of Laura Holmes et al. Versus Baltimore City Police Department, case number 19 CV 3392, in the amount of $96,000. The Law Department has accumulated 4 settlement agreements into one to seek the request from the Board of Estimates. This is a case that stems from a lawsuit filed by 4 plaintiffs against the Mayor and City Council the Baltimore Police Department and former Baltimore Commissioner Kevin Davis regarding interactions with BPD members in Harlem Park neighborhood following the shooting and death of Detective Sean Suter in 2017. During a period of November 15th to November 20, 2017, a crime scene was held by the Baltimore Police Department for several blocks in the neighborhood for those period of time, to which the plaintiffs has alleged that their constitutional violations were prohibited, i.e. 4th and 14th Amendment, as well as Article 26 of the Maryland Declaration of Rights. The Law Department, in conjunction with the Baltimore Police Department, has reviewed the lawsuit, conduct preliminary investigations, had consultations with opposing counsel and plaintiffs, and in the best interest of the city, the Law Department is requesting the Board of Estimates to settle this matter at $96,000 for the 4 plaintiffs. With that, there were some non-monetary concessions and agreements, one being the expungement of police records concerning the arrests of individuals and plaintiffs concerning this incident in Harlem Park neighborhood, as well as an order of dismissal, an agreed order of dismissal by the parties, and finally, a letter of apology to the plaintiffs and the neighbors within the Harlem Park neighborhood. This settlement agreement is an opportunity for the Baltimore City Police Department, the City of Baltimore, as well as the Mayor's Office under the leadership of Brandon Scott, to really address how we, the city, interacts with community members to build trust within the Baltimore Police Department. So in the best interest of the city, the Law Department has negotiated equitable settlement agreement with the plaintiffs in this matter. And so the Law Department requests the honorable board members to approve the settlement in the amount of $96,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Solicitor Ingram, for that explanation and walking us through the finding of the facts that you had to come up with this determination. At this point, are there any additional questions, concerns from members of the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my understanding is that the settlement agreement requires the department to revise 2 of its operational policies, one on field interviews, investigative stops, weapons pass downs and searches, and investigative operations. Can someone speak to the specific revisions to each of these policies and how they address the kinds of problems that resulted in the residents of Harlem Park being kept from their homes?
Yes, sir. The policy that were revised was policies 1008 and 1112, and I will ask that Ms. Lisa Walton explain more in detail the policy revisions for the board's consideration.
Thank you, and thank you, board members. Yes, so we collaborated directly with the ACLU, which represents the plaintiffs in this action, on a number of policy revisions to address the specific nature of the complaint, the concerns that the plaintiffs expressed about how they were treated during the course of the Harlem Park crime scene, and directed at ensuring that those things don't happen again. So this includes such things as putting time limits on how long a crime scene should be held in the first instance, and to the extent that there are operational needs to maintain that crime scene for a longer period of time, requiring supervisory approval over that decision. Prioritizing enabling folks to get to and from their homes. So if it's a large crime scene, trying to focus on those areas that enable folks to have access to their homes more quickly, things of that nature. And so this, of course, as you're aware, is subject to the process required by the consent decree for policy revision. So it's contemplated by the settlement agreement, and it's known to the plaintiffs and the ACLU that this is a set of policy revisions that BPD will be promoting and supporting. Of course, we still have to go through that normal collaboration process that we always have with the Department of Justice, the consent decree monitoring team, receiving public comment and things of that nature. So although one of the 2 policies, I believe 1112, has already been adopted and approved, typically to see these policy revisions through to implementation, there has to be typically more than one public comment period in the course of revising the policy itself. Once the policy is finalized and approved by the Department of Justice and monitoring team, then there has to be training developed to help explain to the police officers how they're supposed to implement the policy. Training gets developed. Once it's developed and approved, then it's delivered. And once delivery is complete, that is typically when these policies become implemented. Does that address your question, sir?
It does. Mr. President, I had one other question. If
Go ahead.
other than the change in the policies and I believe there's monetary compensation, were there any other parts of the settlement that the city is committing to?
Yes. So the city has committed to expunging the records of those that were the plaintiffs that may have arrest records concerning the incident in 2017, in November 2017, as well as a letter of apology and finally an agreed order of dismissal of this complaint.
So the expungements are limited to the individual plaintiffs in the suit, not everybody who was stopped, during the course of this back in 2017. It's just the expungement is specifically targeted to the plaintiffs of this particular matter.
I believe, Lisa, you can explain more in detail.
I can speak to that. Yes, thank you, Deputy Solicitor. The scope of the population impacted by it is the 4 named plaintiffs and members of their immediate household. And I would note that none of these people were arrested. So the records that we have identified that relate to that population of people during the time of this suit or crime scene, they're citizen contact receipts. And this is sort of the documentation of essentially like the lowest level of police civilian engagement. So not an arrest, not a detailed investigatory record, but just sort of a receipt to reflect the interaction, to say that Officer X spoke to Citizen Y at this date and time. The reason for that, as opposed to it being a population level decision, is of course that this is not a class action. It's an individual action brought by these 4 plaintiffs. So we're providing relief to them.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Mr. Deputy Solicitor, that letter of apology, is that provided to all members inside, all the neighbors inside of Harlem Park, or just to the 4 members? And has that been made public?
The letters for the entire neighborhood and the aspect of being public, Lisa, can you explain it in detail, that process?
Yes. So the letter was part of the negotiated settlement. We did work together with the ACLU to arrive at language that they felt that their clients would find to be meaningful and to be indicative of real sincerity. It has been signed by the police commissioner and delivered to the plaintiff's attorney, I believe about a week or 2 ago. It also is attached to the settlement agreement itself, so it's been submitted to the Board of Estimates. And ultimately, when this settlement is filed with the court to finally resolve the case, there is an outstanding issue of attorney's fees in this case that we're still working to resolve. But upon the final resolution of the case, this settlement agreements will be filed with the court, so they'll be on the public docket.
Thank you, Mr. Walden. Ms. Walden, I see, Mr. Mayor, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Mr. President, I just want to say that the commissioner's letter has also been published in the newspaper and on all the TV stations as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for adding that. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for the Law Department or BPD from the board? Hearing and seeing none, at this point, I'll entertain a motion to proceed.
I'll move approval.
So move. Oh, second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is now approved. Is there anything else that board members would like to bring before we conclude today? Hearing and seeing none, as there's no more business before the desk of the board, we'll recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will be in recess next week. We will reconvene on Wednesday, July the 14th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Baltimore, please stay safe. Please continue to follow all health protocols associated with COVID-19. And we absolutely love you. See you on July the 14th. Goodbye.
Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. As part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings virtually. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0842939. Board of Estimates meetings are broadcast live on Charm TV, channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at https://www.charmtvbaltimore.com/live-stream. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings virtually while the state of emergency declared by the Mayor of Baltimore and the Governor of Maryland remains in effect. I have the following addendum to note. Bureau of Procurement B5006137, police uniforms. Please change the bid due date from June 30th, 2021 to July 21st, 2021. Thank you.
I move that we note the addendum.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will move on to the first and only bids to be received. This is from DPW WC1410, Urgent Need Water Infrastructure Rehabilitation and Improvements, Phase 1, Fiscal Year 21, with a bid bond of 2% if the bid is over $100,000. Right. All right, the first bid is from Spinello Companies. And I have what looks like the copy of a bid bond. Do you have the original one?
I have a copy of the bid bond.
Okay. And we have the bid bond, and the bid is in the amount, total bid of $8,633,000 and no cents. Right. And you just tuck it back in and slide it on down.
No, I think you just set it up.
Oh. There you go. All right. Next bid is Metra Industries Incorporated. I think this, yes, we have a bid bond. And the total bid amount of $7,746,450 and no cents.
Correct.
Okay. This bid is from J. Fletcher Creamer and Son, Incorporated, with a bid bond and a total bid of $8,937,590.00.
That is correct.
And then the final bid. I can't say last but not least because that might not be true. Final bid is from Robert E. Harrington, R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Company Incorporated, with a bid bond and a total bid in the amount of $6,995,850.00.
That is correct.
I move that we refer these to the Department of Public Works for tabulation and report.
I second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That concludes the business before the board at this time. The Board of Estimates stands in recess until Wednesday, July 14th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much, and everyone stay safe.